Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Victor Newman rose from his chair, his usual commanding presence amplified by the weight of years of power, influence, and unyielding authority. The room fell silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, every pair of eyes fixed on him, searching for a clue in his expression, a flicker of emotion that might reveal what he had discovered. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, slicing through the suspense like a razor through silk. "The DNA results are in," he said, each word heavy, carrying the authority and finality only Victor could wield, and for a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped, the very air frozen in place, because everyone knew, from the tiniest twitch to the subtlest glance, that lives were about to change forever. Secrets long buried in layers of deceit and half-truths were about to explode into the open, and Diane Jenkins, sitting tensely at the edge of her seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously between Victor and the reactions of those around her, felt the full force of impending revelation like a storm ready to break, because she knew, as everyone else would soon, that the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for months, perhaps even years, was about to crumble under the unrelenting scrutiny of truth and the young men and women who had unknowingly been caught in the web of her concealment. Particularly Kyle, the one at the heart of the deception, who had grown up believing in one reality only to have it violently stripped away, felt a knot of dread twist in their stomachs, a sense of betrayal so sharp and immediate that it threatened to undo them from the inside out. And as Victor's piercing gaze swept across the room, landing on Diane like a predator sizing up its prey, the weight of the accusation in his eyes was undeniable, leaving no room for evasion or justification. And with a slow, deliberate exhale that seemed to carry the gravity of decades, he finally revealed the truth that no one dared hope would remain hidden. "Kyle's father is not who you've all been led to believe." Diane hid the fact that his real father, his true DNA, points to, and the pause that followed was excruciating, stretching the tension almost unbearably, each heartbeat in the room pounding in ears like a drumroll to some impending doom. And then, as if the words themselves were imbued with the power to shatter lives, he said, "Is someone completely unexpected, someone whose identity changes everything you thought you knew about your family, your history, your place in this city." And in that instant, gasps and murmurs rippled through the room like a shockwave, each character reacting in a way that was uniquely theirs. Kyle's jaw dropped in disbelief, his eyes wide, his hands trembling slightly as if the ground beneath him had just given way. Phyllis, always one to try and maintain composure, felt her pulse quicken, her mind racing through all the consequences, alliances, and heartbreaks that would inevitably follow. Summer, torn between shock and anger, struggled to process how someone could keep such a fundamental truth hidden, the betrayal cutting deeper because it was so personal, so intimate, and Diane herself, pale and shaken, could only manage a fragile, almost inaudible defense, her voice quivering. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," but Victor's expression left no room for excuses, the silent verdict in his eyes stating unequivocally that the lies, no matter how well-intentioned or misguided, had reached their limit. And in that moment, the very fabric of the Newman family's complex web of relationships, loyalties, and rivalries felt like it was being ripped apart by the sheer force of revelation, every hidden secret and unspoken tension now surfacing like a tidal wave, threatening to drown them all in a sea of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. And as the room collectively absorbed the magnitude of Victor's announcement, the emotional fallout began immediately, like sparks igniting a powder keg, with whispered confrontations, pointed accusations, and tearful confessions intertwining in a chaotic symphony of raw human emotion. Because in the world of Genoa City, where every action has consequences and every secret has a way of emerging at the worst possible moment, the revelation that Diane had deliberately hidden Kyle's true paternity was not just a personal shock. It was a seismic event, one that would redefine relationships, append carefully laid plans, and force each character to confront the very core of their identity, their morality, and their capacity for forgiveness, and even as Kyle struggled to reconcile the man he had believed was his father with the reality now laid bare before him, the complex layers of resentment, confusion, and longing twisted together inside him, a storm of emotions that mirrored the chaos erupting in the room, because the truth, as Victor so powerfully demonstrated, has a way of demanding recognition, of refusing to be ignored, and in the aftermath of that revelation, as Diane shrank under the weight of everyone's stunned gaze, as allies and enemies alike tried to gauge the shifting power dynamics, and as Kyle grappled with a future rewritten in the space of a single conversation, the enduring lesson of Genoa City played out yet again. No matter how deep the deception, no matter how carefully one might try to control the narrative, the truth will inevitably emerge, unstoppable and unforgiving, reshaping lives in ways that are sometimes devastating, sometimes liberating, but always irreversible. And in this instance, as Victor Newman held the room in his unyielding grasp, the DNA results served as both a weapon and a revelation, cutting through layers of pretense, exposing raw vulnerability, and setting the stage for an entirely new chapter in the lives of those caught in the crossfire, a chapter defined by reckoning, emotional upheaval, and the inescapable power of truth to change everything in its path, leaving the audience, as always, breathless, emotionally invested, and utterly captivated by the ever-evolving drama that is the young and the restless. The room seemed to pulse with the energy of 1,000 unspoken emotions, as though the very walls were vibrating under the weight of the revelation, and every heartbeat felt magnified, echoing in the minds of those present, because in that instant, nothing else mattered except the truth that Victor had unearthed and laid bare with the precision and inevitability of a master strategist. And as Kyle struggled to comprehend the reality that had been hidden from him for his entire life, his mind raced, replaying every memory, every interaction with his supposed father, with a sense of disorientation that was almost physical, like the ground beneath him had shifted and left him unmoored, floating in an emotional void where certainty had once existed, and Phyllis, ever the observer, the one who had always known how to navigate the treacherous waters of family secrets, felt a pang of sympathy for Kyle even as she calculated the consequences of this revelation on her own life, her heart aching for the young man who had been robbed of a fundamental piece of his identity, while simultaneously recognizing that in Genoa City, sympathy and strategy were often intertwined, inseparable, like the threads of a tapestry that could never be unraveled without leaving marks behind. And Summer, her protective instincts kicking in, felt a surge of anger, not just at Diane for her deception, but at the cruel way life seemed to toy with those who dared to trust, because to hide a truth as monumental as a child's paternity was to tamper with the very foundation of a person's sense of self, and yet, even in her fury, Summer's analytical mind was racing ahead, anticipating the inevitable confrontations, the alliances that would shift, the loyalties that would fracture under the strain of Victor's revelation. And as Diane sat frozen, a fragile, trembling figure at the epicenter of the storm, she felt the full weight of every secret she had ever kept, every choice she had made to manipulate, conceal, or evade, crashing down upon her like a tidal wave of guilt and fear. And she knew, deep down, that there was no turning back, that no amount of pleading, explaining, or begging could erase the truth now etched into the consciousness of everyone in the room. And she shivered, not just from fear, but from the realization that the life she had constructed around lies was about to collapse, exposing vulnerabilities she had spent years carefully masking. Victor, ever the patriarch, understood the gravity of the moment better than anyone. He knew that the revelation of Kyle's true paternity was not merely a personal matter. It was a seismic shift that would alter the landscape of family, business, and power in Genoa City, and his mind, trained to anticipate and manipulate outcomes, began calculating the fallout even as he delivered the news with the calm authority that had earned him both fear and respect over decades, because in the Newman Empire, information was power, and now that the ultimate piece of information had been disclosed, the dynamics of influence, loyalty, and control were in flux, and every glance, every gesture, Every whisper in the room carried new weight, new potential, as alliances were reconsidered, strategies reevaluated, and every character silently plotted how to respond to the new reality, all while trying to maintain composure in the face of raw, unfiltered emotion, the kind of emotion that only a soap opera as intricate and enduring as the young and the restless could cultivate with such intensity. Kyle, still grappling with the implications of the revelation, felt a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and a desperate need for understanding, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions that left him almost paralyzed, unable to reconcile the image of the man who had raised him with the shocking truth of his biological lineage, and in that storm of emotion, he recognized the fragility of his relationships with those closest to him, questioning every moment of connection, every piece of advice, every word of comfort that had been given, wondering whether it had been tainted by lies, or whether it had been genuine despite the overarching deception. And as he searched Diane's face for answers, he saw not malice, but fear, vulnerability, and regret, a mixture that complicated his anger, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth that people are often flawed, motivated by complex emotions and circumstances, and that betrayal, even when devastating, is rarely simple or one-dimensional. Meanwhile, Phyllis, observing Kyle's turmoil, felt a combination of maternal instinct and strategic caution, knowing that this revelation would ripple outward, affecting not just the immediate family, but also the web of romantic entanglements, business alliances, and old rivalries that made Genoa City the intricate, high-stakes world it had always been, and she weighed every possible response, from offering comfort to Kyle, to using the information to strengthen her own position, because in this city, knowledge was both shield and weapon, and timing was everything, and every move, every word, every subtle glance could tip the delicate balance between support and manipulation, truth and deception, loyalty and betrayal. Summer, never one to shy away from confrontation, felt a burning need to address Diane directly, to demand explanations, apologies, and accountability, because for her, the act of concealing Kyle's true father was not merely a personal betrayal, but a fundamental violation of trust that could not be ignored. And as she approached Diane, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion underlying her words, she demanded, "Why would you hide something so important? Don't you realize the damage you've caused?" And Diane, unable to summon the fortitude to face the full weight of Summer's scrutiny, could only respond with stammering, fragmented sentences, a desperate attempt to justify or minimize her actions. But the words fell flat, echoing empty in the tension-filled room, because the truth, once revealed, cannot be softened by excuses. And the emotional cost of concealment is measured not in intention, but in impact. Victor, watching this exchange, recognized both the fragility and the resilience in the people around him, understanding that moments like these test not just relationships, but character, revealing the true nature of each individual when confronted with upheaval and revelation. And as he scanned the room, noting the mixture of shock, anger, grief, and cautious calculation, he knew that this single revelation, Kyle's true paternity, would have long-lasting consequences that extended far beyond the immediate circle, touching business dealings, romantic entanglements, rivalries, and alliances in ways that were impossible to predict fully, because in Genoa City, family and business are inextricably linked, and the secrets of the heart inevitably bleed into the machinations of power, strategy, and ambition. As the initial shock began to settle, Kyle found himself confronting an internal reckoning, a deep, almost existential questioning of identity, family, and the essence of what makes someone who they are, because suddenly, everything familiar had been stripped away, and he was left navigating an unfamiliar terrain of emotional and social reality, forced to consider not only who his biological father was, but also how this revelation would alter the way he related to the people he had always known as family, and whether he could ever reconcile the man who raised him with the truth now unveiled, or whether that bond would be forever fractured by the deception, a painful, complex calculus of love, loyalty, and forgiveness that would shape his future choices and relationships in profound ways. Diane, meanwhile, felt the suffocating weight of guilt, her mind a whirlwind of regret, self-recrimination, and fear, realizing that no amount of explanation could undo the damage, and that her carefully constructed narrative had crumbled under the simple, inescapable force of truth, leaving her vulnerable, exposed, and at the mercy of those she had deceived. And in the echoing silence that followed Victor's announcement, she experienced the stark, cold reality of accountability, a moment in which every misstep, every hidden motive, every calculated decision came into sharp, undeniable focus, demanding recognition, reflection, and consequence. The ripple effects of the revelation were immediate and far-reaching. Alliances shifted subtly as individuals recalibrated their perceptions of loyalty and trust. Romantic relationships were strained as the foundation of personal history was called into question, and business strategies were reconsidered as the implications of the revelation threatened to alter power dynamics and influence. Because in Genoa City, where every connection is a potential leverage point, knowledge is currency, and secrets, once exposed, can destabilize the delicate equilibrium that maintains the balance of family, empire, and influence. And the DNA results, as Victor had revealed, were more than a personal disclosure. They were a catalyst, a detonator that would set into motion a chain reaction of events that no one could fully predict, control, or contain. Even as Kyle processed the reality of his parentage, he began to realize that identity is not solely determined by biology, but also by experience, choice, and connection, and that the people who love, nurture, and support him play as crucial a role in defining who he is as the genetic link that had just been revealed, a realization that brought both comfort and complexity, because in the wake of betrayal, understanding the interplay between nature and nurture, truth and deception, requires both courage and emotional resilience, and as he looked around the room, he could see reflections of this dynamic in every other character, each grappling with their own revelations, recalibrations, and decisions in real time, navigating the intricate web of emotions and consequences that defines the world of the young and the restless, a world where love, ambition, deceit, and loyalty intersect in unpredictable, often devastating, but always compelling ways. As the reverberations of Victor's announcements settled unevenly across the room, the tension only thickened, a palpable weight that seemed to hang in the air like an ominous storm cloud threatening to burst, and every person present was acutely aware that nothing could ever return to the state of ignorance that had existed moments before, because the unveiling of Kyle's true paternity had fractured the illusion of stability, leaving raw, jagged edges of uncertainty exposed in its wake. And as Kyle struggled to process the reality, a storm of conflicting emotions tore through him. Anger at Diane for her deception, grief for the childhood he thought he had understood, confusion about his identity, and a gnawing curiosity about the man whose DNA defined part of him, yet whose presence in his life had been obscured, leaving Kyle caught between resentment and a tentative desire to understand, to connect, to reconcile the past with the truth, all while battling the immediate shock of betrayal that made the very act of breathing feel heavy and deliberate. Phyllis, observing Kyle's struggle, felt a surge of protective instinct, tempered by the awareness that every action she took now would be scrutinized, every word measured against the unfolding drama, because in Genoa City, even empathy can become a calculated maneuver, a tool in the ongoing game of survival and influence. And as she stepped forward, offering tentative support with a gentle hand on Kyle's shoulder, she silently weighed how best to balance compassion with strategic foresight, knowing that the fallout from this revelation could reshape not just personal relationships, but the intricate network of alliances, power plays, and vendettas that define the city's elite, a complex web in which knowledge is power, secrecy is currency, and every emotional fracture carries both personal and professional consequences. Summer, her gaze still locked on Diane, felt a whirlwind of indignation and incredulity, her mind racing through every moment in which she had unknowingly been manipulated by omission, and she could not help but imagine the cascade of what-ifs. What if this had been revealed earlier? What if Kyle had known the truth all along? How many choices had been made under a false premise? how many relationships had been influenced by a lie so fundamental that it threatened to undo the very foundation of trust. And yet, even as anger coursed through her, she recognized the fragile humanity in Diane's response, the tremor in her voice, the hesitation.